Shabbos Daf Dalit is a short daf. It discusses two main issues. The first one is the question which we had earlier of Rav Bibi Bar Abaye about removing the bread from the wall of the oven. The Gemara will try to figure out what exactly the case over there was, how it fits in the words of Rav Bibi's question. And the second part of the daf will be discussing the halacha that an akira and a hanacha has to be onto a place or from a place which is 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim wide. So how do we have that if a poor person or a rich man pass it from hand to hand? These are going to be the two questions. We'll have a few options to answer each of them, and the Gemara will work through them. So let us begin. We had on Daf Gimel, which we learned yesterday, a question which was asked by Rav Bibi Bar Abaye. The question was as follows. You have somebody who put bread, raw dough, in the oven to bake. Now, he put it there, and he's not violating any Isser D'Oraisa of baking the bread until it reaches the fully baked state. Can he remove the bread in the middle before it's baked in order to prevent his Isser from coming to maturity when the bread becomes fully baked? And what's the problem? The problem is it's also to remove bread from the wall of an oven. Midirabanan, it's called Ridias Hapas. It's forbidden to move the bread. So is he allowed to violate this Isser Darabanan of removing the bread in order to prevent his putting bread in the oven from maturing into an Isser Daraisa when it reaches the fully baked stage? That was Rabibi's question. His actual phrasing is as follows. He says, do we allow him to do Ridias Hapas, to take the bread off, in order to prevent him from coming to a state of being chayav a carbon chatos? Being chayav a carbon chatos means that he put it in there by mistake. He either forgot that it's also or forgot that it's Shabbos, and when it gets fully baked, he will mistakenly have violated an Isser D'Oraisa and have to bring a carbon chatos. So the Gemara has a question here right away. The Gemara says, I don't understand. If it's a carbon chatos, that means that it couldn't be that it was put there on purpose. You don't bring a carbon chatos for something that you did on purpose. He must have not known that it's Asr or not known that it's Shabbos. However, in order to be mechayev carbon chatos, it has to be that he didn't know at any point until it was completed, until the action was completed, he didn't know that it was Shabbos and what he was doing was Asr. He didn't realize that until after the whole story was over. But if that's the case, so then who's asking to take the bread off the wall? He didn't even realize that it was forbidden what he did. So how could we be discussing, is he allowed to take the bread off the wall or not? The only situation that could be is if when he put it in there, he didn't realize that it was Asr, and then at some point while it was baking, he realized that it was forbidden, and he says, hey, am I allowed to take it off? And that's Rav Bibi's question. But the problem is that wouldn't be chayav chatas. You're only chayav chatas if the entire story happened without him realizing that it's forbidden until after it was over. So what is the case here exactly? So the Gemara offers, Rav Shila says, really we are discussing somebody else wants to take the bread off. Meaning the person who put the bread in there didn't realize that it was forbidden, and he never realized it was forbidden until it was too late. However, somebody else realized while the bread was in there and it was baking that it was forbidden what he did. And he's questioning, am I allowed to take the bread off and violate an Isser D'Orabanan in order to save the person who put it there from being over, from violating an Isser D'Oraisa by mistake b'shaygeg? So Gemara says, what kind of question is that? How could one person be over, violate an Isser D'Orabanan in order to save somebody else from doing an Avera? This is a big akira of Gemara. The Gemara is assuming that it's obvious that you're not allowed to put yourself in a situation where you're violating a halacha, even midrabanan, just to save somebody else. Why? How do we have a right to ask of you to put a mistake on your record, to put an Avera on your record in order to save somebody else from an Avera? That can't be. So the Gemara says, okay, really have to change the case over here, and really he put it there b'mezid. The guy put the bread in the oven on purpose. He knew he was violating an Isser D'Oraisa, and while it was baking, he had second thoughts, and he wants to take it off now. And the question is he allowed to? Or is it an Isser of Ridias Hapas and he's not allowed to? And he's trying to avoid his sin, his sinful action developing into a real Isser D'Oraisa by the bread becoming fully baked. Now, the question is that this doesn't fit with chatas, so we amend the terms of Rav Bibi's question. We don't use the word chatas, we use the word skila. His action will become a chiyav skila, become a violation of Shabbos, which incurs the death penalty if we don't allow him to violate the Isur D'Rabbanan of Redias Hapas and take the bread off. And the Gemara actually says that this is not so far-fetched. We actually have a version of Rav Bibi's question where he explicitly uses the word skila instead of the word chatas. Okay, this concludes this discussion. Now the Gemara wants to understand, back in the Mishnah, we had an object which was being brought from outside somebody's yard into the yard, or vice versa, by somebody whose hand stretches across the yard, and it's passed from hand to hand. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. In Akira and Hanacha, when we originally move the object from being at rest into transit, and when we bring it back to the state of rest, that has to be taken from or put into a surface that is at least 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim wide. It's not enough to have a small surface. So how is it that it was passed from hand to hand? The case doesn't make sense. It's either somebody took it from somebody's hand and that was the Akira, or somebody put it into somebody's hand and that was the Hanacha. Both those cases don't add up, because you do not have an Akira or a Hanacha into or from a place which is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So the Gemara says this must be a Tana who does not hold of this 4 tfachim requirement. As a matter of fact, the Rishonim dispute where this 4 tfachim requirement comes from. But the Gemara here, we have Rabbah who says that this is Rabbi Akiva. This is the Gemara's first attempt to figure out who this is. Rabbah says this is Rabbi Akiva, and he doesn't hold of the 4 tfachim requirement. The Gemara says, okay. Rabbah says so, but where do you see that Rabbi Akiva holds of that? In the following case, what happens if somebody throws an object from one Rishus HaYachid, one private domain, across a Rishus HaRabim, a public domain, and then it lands in another Rishus HaYachid. So it goes from Rishus HaYachid to a Rishus HaYachid, and it passes over a Rishus HaRabim in between. So Rabbi Akiva says he violates an Isur D'Oraisa by doing that, because when it is flying through the Rishus HaRabim, it's considered as if it landed and came to rest in the Rishus HaRabim. Now there's two different approaches in the Rishonim here how that works. It's a concept called Kluta, which means received. We'll go with Taisvus' pshat over here, that we view every moment of the object's flight as if it was frozen in that frame. And in that frame, it's in the Rishus HaRabim, and it's obviously below 10 tfachim, otherwise it wouldn't be a problem in halacha. It's below 10 tfachim. We view it as a frozen frame, and in that frozen frame, it's as if it had a hanacha, as if it landed, as if it came to rest in the Rishus HaRabim as it was flying through. So if Rabbi Akiva says that, so then it's obvious that it doesn't hold that it has to land on a 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim surface. It can't be, because even if it's flying, we just view it as if it's frozen in that freeze frame. That's enough of a landing to be chayev. So that is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbah says that is the one who holds of this halacha, and therefore he could be the author of our Mishnah. He doesn't require the 4 by 4 hanacha. So Gemara asks on Rabbah. The Gemara says, hold on a second. You're saying that Rabbah understands Rabbi Akiva's halacha, that when it flies through Rishus HaRabim, it counts as a violation of Shabbos because it's within 10 tfachim. It's less than 10 tfachim off the ground, and he views the freeze frame as if it landed. But hold on a second. We have a Gemara elsewhere where Rabbah says he's not sure that that's what Rabbi Akiva holds, because the Gemara over there says that this Rabbi Akiva is arguing with the Chachamim. The Chachamim say you didn't violate any halacha. You weren't machal Shabbos when it flew through Rishus HaRabim, and Rabbah is wondering what the machlokes is. One option to explain it is that Rabbi Akiva says, like we've explained, that it's viewed as if it's frozen in midair, and that's as if it landed. And the Chachamim disagree with that. But Rabbah had another option as to what Rabbi Akiva holds, which was as follows: that Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim are arguing over a case where it was above 10 tfachim, and therefore it couldn't possibly violate Shabbos because of a freeze frame, because even if you viewed it as frozen, it would still be too high. It would be over 10 tfachim, which is a makam patur. We know the halacha is you're not violating the Isser of Haitzah if it's landing on something which is above 10 tfachim high. So that wouldn't violate anything even if it's frozen. The machlokes is that there is a halacha, a special halacha, that if you pass something across Rishus HaRabim, even above 10 tfachim, it counts as violating the Isser Haitzah. We have a special limud for that. It comes from the Mishkan. When the Leviim loaded the krushim, the boards of the Mishkan, onto the wagons, they passed them from wagon to wagon. Each wagon was a Rishos HaYachid, and when they passed it over, it crossed the space between the wagons. That was a Rishos HaRabim, and it was passed from hand to hand. So that counted as being passed from Rishos HaYachid to Rishos HaYachid, passing Rishos Harabim in between. That was a specific thing which took place in the Mishkan, and therefore, even though it was above 10 tefachim, you're still violating the Isser Haitzah by doing that. That's clear, that halacha. The question here is where this is flying. Rabbi Akiva says flying counts; it's included in that halacha, and the Chacham say flying doesn't count; it's not included in that halacha. But they all agree that if it's under 10 tefachim, then it's counted as a freeze frame, and we view it as if it landed. So the Gemara's question, therefore, is Rabbah isn't sure what Rabbi Akiva holds. So how could Rabbah here be seeming to be so confident as to what Rabbi Akiva holds, and saying that Rabbi Akiva is the author of the Mishnah? But later he said he doesn't know what he holds. He didn't know which of the two options is the right option. So the Gemara says, I'm not impressed by this problem. And that Gemara he didn't know, and in this Gemara, Rabbah already decided that this is the correct shot in Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so the Gemara says, I hear that. But I have another problem. This does not satisfy figuring out who the author of this Mishnah is, because our Mishnah seemed to say that you can do both an Akira and a Hanacha from hand to hand. But this halacha of Rabbi Akiva doesn't have both Akira and a Hanacha. Think about it. The object flies from Rishos HaYachid over Rishos HaRabim into Rishos HaYachid again. And Rabbi Akiva says you only violated Shabbos once. But hold on a second. If it landed in the Rishos HaRabim, so you should have two violations of Shabbos. One where it goes from the Rishos HaYachid and it passes over Rishos HaRabim and it's like it landed. That's one violation. Akira from Rishos HaYachid passing to Rishos HaRabim and Hanacha there. And then you should have another violation where it continues flying and it's like another Akira from Rishos HaRabim and passes into the second Rishos HaYachid. But Rabbi Akiva doesn't say you violated Shabbos twice. He says only once. You know why? Because he only holds that flying through the air counts as a hanacha. It doesn't count as another akira. We have a freeze frame which could say that it landed, but it can't be that it took off again. So therefore, this couldn't be our Mishnah, because our Mishnah seems to say that you have both a akira and hanacha could take place from hand to hand in a surface which is less than 4x4. But Rabbi Akiva, you only have a proof holds of that as far as hanachas, as far as landing, but not as far as taking off. So Gemara says, you're right, we'll accept that. Rabbi Akiva was not necessarily author of the Mishnah. We'll say that it's Rebbe. Where it says Rebbe. Okay, who's Rebbe? Where do you see anything about Rebbe? So the Gemara says it's a brisa which Rebbe says that if you throw something and it lands on a piece of wood that sticks out of somewhere, that you are chayev. You threw it from Rishos HaYachid to Rishos HaRabim and it landed on a piece of wood, you're chayev. And there you see that it landed without any surface of 4x4. It was just a piece of wood that sticks out. So that therefore shows that Rebbe holds you don't need to have 4x4, and therefore he could be the author of our Mishnah. Well, the Gemara rejects this. The Gemara says we know that Abaye explains that statement of Rebbe differently. Abaye says, no, Rebbe was talking about something else. Rebbe was talking about where it landed on a tree, and the tree had its branches hanging into Rishos HaRabim, but the trunk of the tree was planted in Rishos HaYachid. And Rebbe's halacha is to say that the branches count as where the trunk is, and therefore the trunk is in Rishos HaYachid. The branches count as if they're in Rishos HaYachid, even though they're hanging over Rishos HaRabim, and the object which landed is as if it landed in Rishos HaYachid, and it's just as good as 4x4. So this halacha doesn't tell you that you don't need 4x4 in the place that it lands. This halacha tells you that the branches of a tree count as where the roots are, and you do have 4x4. So again, Rebbe does not. This statement of Rebbe cannot support what we're looking for in the Mishnah. Where says I'll tell you a different halacha that Rebbe says. That halacha will be the source where Rebbe holds you don't need to have an akira and a hanacha in 4x4, and that is the following statement. Rebbe says, and we have a quote here, a brisa. Rebbe says that somebody throws an object from Rishos HaRabim to Rishos HaRabim, and it crosses Rishos HaYachid in the middle, Yechayev twice, because when it passes over Rishos HaYachid, it's like a freeze frame, it's like it lands, and therefore you have both a hakira from the first throwing, and you have you have a landing of the throwing there. That's Chil Shabbos number 1, and then it's considered like it takes off again, and it lands in the next place, and that's violating Shabbos number 2. So Rebbe says you have both an akira and a hanacha when it's flying through Rishos HaYachid, which is the one in the middle here, and therefore you see that Rebbe holds you do not need to have it landing on a surface which is 4x4.